The shelter had rules. Lights out at 10. No exceptions. Margaret didn't mind the rules. She minded the noise. Coughing, whispers, restless movement from people who couldn't sleep, even when they needed to. She lay on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling she didn't own, listening to lives stacked too close together. A few months ago, she had space, a house, a routine, a quiet she never thought she'd miss. Now, everything was shared, even silence. Her husband used to handle things before they became problems. Bills, repairs, the kind of quiet responsibilities that held a life together without drawing attention. Until one day, they didn't. Medical bills came first, then everything else. She sold what she could, paid what she could, and when there was nothing left to sell, she ended up here. The shelter didn't ask questions. It didn't need to. Everyone there had a version of the same story. Margaret turned onto her side, pulling the thin blanket tighter. She didn't cry. Not anymore. That part had passed. Now, she just thought about what was left. Morning came early. She folded the blanket carefully, like it mattered. Because to her, it did. Routine was the only thing she still controlled. She stepped outside into the cool morning air. The shelter sat near the edge of town, where buildings thinned out and fields began. That's where she walked. Not toward anything specific, just away from everything else. The road curved gently, leading past open land that stretched farther than most people cared to go. Margaret liked it. No noise. No eyes. Just space. That's where she saw the sign. It leaned slightly to one side, its edges worn and faded. For sale. Below it, barely readable. Barn. She slowed. Not because she was interested. Because it stood out. The land around it was empty, overgrown, and used. She followed the dirt path. The barn came into view slowly. It was worse than she expected. Wooden panels warped and split. The roof sagged deeply in the middle, like it had given up years ago. Doors hung crooked, barely attached. It didn't look abandoned. It looked forgotten. Margaret stood still for a moment. No one would buy this, she murmured. But she didn't leave. Instead, she walked closer. The ground beneath her feet was uneven, dry in some places, soft in others. She stepped inside. The smell hit first. Old wood. Dust. Time. Light filtered through gaps in the roof, cutting through the space in uneven lines. The structure creaked faintly as she moved, but it didn't collapse. That was the first thing she noticed. It still held. The beams. Worn, but intact. The frame. Bent, but standing. Margaret walked slowly across the interior. Hay remnants in the corners. Broken tools scattered. Nothing valuable. Nothing obvious. But something about it felt stable. She looked down. The ground inside wasn't completely dirt. Parts of it looked different. Harder. Packed. She knelt slightly, brushing her hand across it. Not concrete, but not loose earth either. She frowned, then stood. One thing at a time. She stepped back outside. The wind moved softly through the open land. The barn stood behind her. Not impressive, not useful, but still there. And for someone with nothing, that mattered. The number on the sign still worked. She called. The owner arrived the next afternoon. An older man. Quiet. Practical. He stepped out of his truck and looked at her, then at the barn. "You hear about this?" he asked. Margaret nodded. He glanced back at the structure. "You know what it is. A barn. A broken one," he said. He walked her around it, pointing things out. Roof damage. Structural wear. Years of neglect. "Been sitting like this a long time," he said. Margaret listened. Not to what was wrong, but to what was still there. Then she asked, "How much?" He looked at her carefully. Not dismissive. Not surprised. Just assessing. "How much you got?" he asked. Margaret hesitated, then answered honestly. $29. There was a pause. He looked at the barn, then back at her. Finally, "Give me 3. 3, she repeated. $3, he said. "And it's yours." "Why?" she asked. He shrugged. "No one else wants it. And something tells me," he glanced at her, "you're not looking for perfect." Margaret didn't respond. She reached into her pocket, pulled out $3, handed it to him. And just like that, she owned a broken barn. That night, she didn't go back to the shelter. She stayed. Not inside fully. Not yet. But close. Sitting just outside the entrance. Watching the sky darken over the open land. The barn creaked softly behind her. Still worn. Still unstable. But standing. And for the first time in months. She wasn't surrounded by noise. She was surrounded by space, by quiet, by something that was hers, even if it wasn't much yet. She looked down at her hands, then back at the barn. One thing at a time, she said quietly. No plan, no guarantees, just the next step. And somewhere beneath the ground she had stood on, something waited, unseen, unnoticed. For now, the first night by the barn wasn't comfortable, but it was quiet. Margaret sat with her back against one of the wooden posts just outside the entrance, her coat wrapped tightly around her. The wind moved softly across the open land, brushing through the tall grass in long, steady waves. No voices, no footsteps, no crowded room filled with restless people. Just space. That alone felt like something she hadn't had in a long time. By morning, the reality settled in. The barn was hers. And if she wanted it to become anything more than a place to sit, she had to start. She stood slowly, brushing dust from her coat, and walked inside. The structure creaked as she moved, but it held. She didn't look at everything, just the next problem. That was the rule. Not everything, just the next thing. Roof, she murmured. Sunlight streamed through multiple gaps above, cutting through the dim space in bright, uneven lines. Not ideal, but not impossible. She walked around the perimeter, studying the structure. Some sections were worse than others. She didn't need to fix all of it. Just enough. Outside, she found scraps. Old wood. Broken panels. Pieces of something that had once been used for repairs. She dragged them back. Climbed carefully onto the lower sections of the roof. Every movement deliberate. The wood beneath her feet groaned, but didn't give. She placed the boards over the largest openings. Secured them as best she could using nails she salvaged from loose planks below. It wasn't clean work, but by the time she climbed down, the biggest gaps were covered. That night, the wind still came, but it didn't pass straight through. And that mattered. The second problem, the floor. Most of it was packed dirt, but parts still felt different. Harder. Margaret knelt again, brushing her hand across the surface. There it was. That same resistance she'd noticed before. Not natural. Something beneath. She paused. Not rushing. Not assuming. Just observing. One thing at a time, she reminded herself. She stood. There were still more immediate needs. The door. It hung crooked, barely closing. She adjusted it using pressure and scrap wood. Reinforced the frame. Aligned it enough that it stayed shut. Not perfect, but secure. That night, she slept inside. Not deeply, not comfortably, but inside. And that changed something. By the end of the first week, the barn had shifted. Not visually, not in a way anyone else would notice, but in function. It held, and that meant she could stay. Food was still a problem. Her money, already low, dropped further. So she adapted. The land around the barn wasn't empty. It just required attention. She found edible plants along the edges. Wild growth she recognized from years of gardening with her husband. Not much, but enough to supplement. She made small trips into town when she had to. Bought only what she needed. Every dollar stretched. Every decision deliberate. By the second week, she returned to the floor. That spot. That difference. This time, she brought a tool. An old shovel she found leaning behind the barn, rusted but still usable. She knelt again, pressed the edge into the ground. It resisted at first. Then, gave. Not like loose dirt. Like something packed. Controlled. She dug slowly. Carefully. The sound changed as she went deeper. Less like soil. More like something placed. Then, the shovel hit something solid. A dull, hollow sound. Margaret stopped. Brushed the dirt away with her hands. Wood. A flat surface. Buried. Her pulse slowed. Not from fear. From focus. She cleared more. Revealing edges. Corners. A lid. A box. Old. Worn. But intact. Margaret sat back slightly. Looked at it. Not rushing. Not reacting. Just understanding what she had found. Then, slowly, she pried it open. The hinges resisted. Then gave. Inside. Wrapped bundles. Cloth. Aged. Carefully placed. She reached in. Unwrapped one. Paused. Money. Old bills. Stacked. Bound. She didn't move at first. Didn't react. Just stared. Then checked another bundle. The same. And another. More. Her hands trembled slightly as she leaned back. The barn around her stayed silent. Unchanged. But everything had shifted. This wasn't luck. This was something that had been hidden. Left. Forgotten. And now. Found. Margaret closed the box slowly. Not out of fear. Out of control. Because this wasn't something to rush. She stood, looked around the barn again. The same broken walls. The same patched roof. But it didn't feel the same. Because now, she had options. Real ones. But she didn't change everything overnight. She didn't leave. Didn't rush to spend. That wasn't who she was. She used it the same way she used everything else. Carefully. She reinforced the structure properly. Replaced damaged beams. Secured the roof. Not perfectly, but strongly. She improved the interior. Cleared more space. Organized it. Made it functional. Then, she expanded. Not dramatically. Just enough. She added a small setup near the entrance. Basic supplies. Water. Food. Simple. Reliable. People noticed. Not at first. But slowly. This place is open. Yes. They stopped. Bought small things. Left. The barn. Once ignored. Now had purpose. By the third month. It was stable. The money from the box. Still mostly untouched. Used only where needed. The rest. Secured. By the fourth month. The barn didn't look abandoned anymore. It looked intentional. Maintained. Alive. Then, one afternoon, a car pulled in. Clean. Polished. A man stepped out. Well-dressed. Out of place. He looked at the barn for a long moment. Then walked up. "You own this?" he asked. Margaret nodded. He glanced around. "You've done a lot with it." She didn't respond. Just waited. He looked at the structure. The land. The layout. Then said, "This area, it has potential." Margaret stayed quiet. He continued. "We've been looking at properties like this. Quiet locations. Expandable land." She glanced toward the ground. Toward where the box had been buried. Then back at him. "I'm not selling it," she said calmly. He smiled slightly. "I wasn't asking you to." A pause. "I was asking if you'd consider building more. Not taking. Building. Together." The wind moved softly through the open land. The barn stood behind her. Stronger. Steadier. And no longer something people pitied. Margaret looked at the structure. Then back at him. "We can talk," she said. Because this time, she wasn't trying to survive. She was deciding what came next. And that was worth more than anything buried beneath the ground. And for the first time in a long while, Margaret didn't feel rushed. The man handed her a card, but she didn't look at it right away. Instead, she turned slightly, letting her eyes move across the land she now knew by memory. The way the grass bent with the wind. The repaired lines of the barn. The places that used to feel broken, but now held firm. 6 months ago, she would have said yes immediately. Out of fear. Out of necessity. Out of not having anything to fall back on. Now, she had something. Not just the money. Not just the structure. But the understanding of how she got here. She had built this. Piece by piece. Decision by decision. And that meant she didn't have to give it away just because someone else finally saw its value. Margaret looked back at the man. "You'll have to be specific," she said calmly. "I'm not interested in turning this into something I don't recognize." He nodded, almost like he expected that. "That's fair." She took the card from his hand this time, looked at it briefly, then tucked it into her coat pocket. "I'll think about it," she added. He smiled slightly. "That's all I'm asking." When he left, the quiet returned. Margaret stood there for a moment longer, then turned and walked back toward the barn. Inside, everything was exactly where she left it. Organized. Intentional. Alive. She ran her hand along one of the beams she had reinforced herself. Solid. A small breath left her, almost like a quiet acknowledgement. She hadn't just found something buried. She had uncovered something in herself. The ability to rebuild. To choose. To wait. Margaret stepped back outside, closing the door behind her. The wind moved gently across the land again. But this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt open. And whatever came next, it would be on her terms.